Welcome back to Channel 6 News. We begin today with breaking news from the Northern Territory, where a search is being undertaken for a 9-week-old baby girl who has disappeared from a camping ground near Ayers Rock. We will bring you more of this story as it comes in.
A full-scale search around Ayers Rock today has led to the finding of Azaria's blood-stained jumpsuit almost 1 week after she's disappeared.
The coroner, Dennis Barrett, of the inquest into Azaria Chamberlain's disappearance, has just announced that a wild dog, or dingo, took Azaria.
Today, more developments in the case of Azaria Chamberlain, with the Northern Territory Supreme Court quashing the findings of the first inquest. They are now pushing for another inquest into Azaria Chamberlain's death.
Lindy Chamberlain has been found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of her 9.5-week-old daughter, Azaria, with her husband, Michael Chamberlain, also convicted as an accessory after the fact.
The discovery of the matinee jacket worn by Azaria Chamberlain when she disappeared has been found, prompting the Chamberlain's immediate release from jail. It is suspected that this could spark a Royal Commission investigation.
After a lengthy ordeal, the Chamberlain Royal Commission today announced the exoneration of convicted murderer Lindy Chamberlain, who is to be cleared of all previous charges after the discovery last year of Azaria's matinee jacket.
The final chapter in the Chamberlain's case has concluded today with the findings of the fourth inquest into the death of Azaria Chamberlain. Coroner Morris announced her findings that the death of Azaria was caused by being taken by a dingo, confirming the Chamberlain story all along. We continue now on our specialist report in the Chamberlain case. Here with me today is Professor Brown, a forensic scientist who has studied this unique case. Professor, can you elaborate on some of the issues and complications resulting from the collection, analysis and presentation of evidence?
Thank you. And with the benefit of hindsight, it is clear that the Chamberlain case was a mist of injustice and inappropriate forensic procedures. On countless occasions, the evidence was incorrectly tested and results incorrectly interpreted, which together led to the conviction of Mrs. Chamberlain. This is even clearer when we consider the prosecution's statement that the car was awash with blood. Put simply, when considering the presence of blood in isolation, all stains presumed to be blood should be examined according to standard procedures, entailing the documentation of the stains, the presumptive testing, followed by confirmatory testing of the sample and a control. Only after confirming the presence of blood should it be tested for fetal hemoglobin or species determination. However, this process was not upheld for several pieces of evidence, with stains thought to be blood. For example, in one instance, the examiner, Mrs. Cool, considered the colour and rate of reaction from the presumptive orthotolidine test to be definitive proof of the presence of blood. I can be certain in my statement, along with my fellow colleagues, Freeney, Martin and Baxter, that were directly involved in the case, that similar results would also be observed in the presence of a copper compound on these objects.
So you're saying the prosecution relied on the results of the presumptive tests to conclude the stain was blood? There was no other tests done?
Yes, for many of the samples that's correct. And furthermore, there were issues with the age of some of the analysed stains that were not addressed. The blood samples from the car were only collected 13 months after the incident and would have been degraded, changing the physical structure of the blood's components due to exposure to high temperatures. This in itself would have caused invalid results in any of Mrs. Cool's confirmatory tests. Unfortunately, however, this degradation causes reactions to occur that are hard for an inexperienced scientist, as Mrs. Cool was at the time, to distinguish from the reactions with blood. All of the stains from the car that she concluded as blood were actually this other, non-specific reaction, and no blood was present. In regards to the examination of objects within the car, the testing and analysis was poorly conducted and/or misinterpreted. Although the metal plate was aptly examined microscopically for blood by Dr. Jones, poor quality equipment led to inconclusive results. Despite this, Dr. Jones concluded that the blood was present. In addition, in relation to the camera bag, Mrs. Cool failed to account for the rust or grit present as sources of the false positives. and she inappropriately relied on results from tests where the controls failed. All these mistakes are combined with the fact that Mrs. Cool did not document the test results before destroying them as per laboratory procedure at the time, and therefore limited other experts to using Mrs. Cool's notes for their analysis.
Thank you, Professor. We now cross to our reporter, who is interviewing a forensic crime scene investigator.
So, what is your opinion about the way the evidence was handled during this investigation?
Similar to what Professor Brown was saying about the blood testing protocols not being followed, it is quite evident that when one looks over the evidence that was presented against Mrs. Chamberlain, that much of it resulted from simple failures in documenting and collecting the evidence. This led to lengthy debates about the volume of blood found and the positioning of Azaria's jumpsuit, both of which would have been unnecessary if the investigators had documented the evidence correctly. A further point of interest was in the complete disregard shown towards some pieces of evidence. In fair criminal proceedings, all evidence should be fairly considered, regardless of whether or not it supports the investigator's hypothesis or the prosecution's. However, it is clear that the Northern Territory Police were under pressure from both the public and the media, and wanted a conviction so strongly against Lindy that they ignored and mishandled a lot of the evidence which supported her version of events. The most obvious example was the space blanket. This was located outside the tent the night Azaria disappeared. Lindy claimed that she saw dingo prints on the blanket, a claim that was backed up by many of her family members. But the police failed to document and lift the prints, or even record the officer who was responsible for collecting the space blanket. When Lindy next saw the blanket, the prints were gone, and there was no longer any evidence to support her case.
So, Mrs. Chamberlain wasn't just let down by the forensic experts, but also by the police.
Yes, many of the mistakes made throughout the case would have been a result of those two groups.
Though, one thing that hasn't been touched on is the disagreements even between the experts involved with the trial. This was particularly evident with the fibre analysis concerning the jumpsuit. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, well, the most prominent evidence given was on the jumpsuit by Professor Chapin. He claims that he used an electron microscope to detect phenomena known as planar arrays and fibre tucks that he associated to be a result of scissor cuts. However, optical microscopes are considered better suited for the detection of these planar arrays. More importantly, however, Professor Chapin was not the one responsible for this analysis. It was Dr. Robertson who did the examinations. Thus, Professor Chapin's evidence was not valid in court. As for the other experts giving evidence on clothing, many of them were forensic odontologists, but had little or no experience regarding dingo dentistry, leading to inadequate and conflicting evidence.
Okay, so given everything that went wrong in this case, the failure to follow standard testing procedures, the lack of documentation, the inadequate expert testimony, should we not be concerned about the possibility of something like this happening again?
Yes, but thankfully we now have resources set up to stop this from happening. It was actually in part thanks to the recommendations by Justice Morley's Royal Commission that has led to the establishment of NIMS, the National Institute of Forensic Science, which has put in place measures for quality assurance, effective collaboration with the police, and the enforcement of standardised procedures. On top of this, forensic accreditations organisations such as NATA have been introduced to make sure forensic labs are doing the right thing, which has actually reduced the extent of such serious injustices being seen.
Thank you. And tonight I will end on this note. Injustices can be seen when conclusions are presumed and evidence is mishandled. However, the truth is finally discovered when the correct forensic protocols and standards are adhered to. Somewhere between the beginning of this event and the end of this case, the truth was lost. An innocent individual was prosecuted, but the Chamberlain family fought and won their 32-year-long campaign.